Well, welcome everyone to the signature session in Mobiles, Musicians and Machines. My name is Toby Gifford. I'm a staff member here in the Music Tech Department. This is Nora Farrell. She's also a research fellow with the Research Centre and is a famed music technologist. And Andrew Brown, who is also on staff here in the Music Technology Department. And we're going to just have a kind of a mixture between a panel session, a discussion, a presentation, a performance and an audience interactive session, I think. And if you can think of anything else, we'll do that too. So the formats will be, I'll give a brief little intro to the topic area and then we'll hand over to Nora, who is going to talk about and demonstrate some stuff to do with mobiles and music. And then we'll hand over to Andrew, who will demonstrate some musician and machine work that we've been doing. But just to start off, I thought I'd give a brief little appetizer and taster as to what this broad area is of music making in the 21st century with technology, mobiles, computers, and all that sort of thing. So I want to start off the discussion with a kind of a question. What is a musical instrument? And a first contender. A guitar. I don't think there's going to be any contest in anyone's mind that a guitar is a musical instrument. What that means is perhaps a question that you might not have unpacked. What makes it a musical instrument as opposed to a desk, for example. But in any case, I think we're all happy to say a guitar is a musical instrument. But what about a laptop? Would you consider a laptop to be a musical instrument? And the argument that I think we're going to try and make and convince you of in this session is that it can be. It depends how you use it, but in many circumstances, a laptop is a musical instrument. Andrew will probably also be discussing whether or not a laptop can be a musician, possibly even more contentious. And I'm not quite sure whether we would say we think it is or not. But it's an open question. It remains an open question. What about a mobile phone? Well, Nora, I suspect, will be attempting to convince you that yes, a mobile phone is also an instrument. So clearly there's a lot of issues to unpack as to what we mean by an instrument. How can we relate this to the types of performance practices that we've become used to with a tradition of acoustic instruments or even technological instruments that are nevertheless more perhaps tactile than one can expect from a laptop or even a mobile phone, although the thing with mobile phones, of course, is increasingly that they do have tactile and sensorial capacities that can respond not just to touch but to body movement, position and so on. So I just want to play a little teaser video before I hand over to the other panelists. But just broadly, these are the questions we're putting out there for discussion for this session. What is a musical instrument? What are effective musical gestures? And how does music technology service novices on the one hand or experts on the other, and the whole spectrum in between? So just a brief little entertaining interlude.
もしもし。
もしもし。
ライブあんの？わかりました。じゃあ行きます。
はい、後でね。
はい、じゃあね。
It's only about 5 minutes, this film. It's not cool.
最初2段目はいはいマッチ
じゃあぼちぼちいきますか。
So on that note, I'd like to hand over to Nora Farrell.
All right. So, a quick test. How many instruments did we see in that video? Well, that's the consideration that I've faced in the past, 30-odd years that I've been doing this wacky stuff. I'll give you a little bit of background of why I come to this panel. The first 15 years of my professional career was in the record business at BMG and Sony and Polygram, mostly in production and A&R. And so I had my epiphany moment back in 1996 when I was in a very long steering committee meeting with a group of us trying to put Sony Music online with its first website. So unfortunately, I was on the side of the table that believed music should be freely available to all, and I realized pretty quickly that was going to be a losing battle, that I was going to have to hit my head against the wall for the next 15 years or put my money where my mouth was and go out and do it on my own. So I began collaborating with my husband, William Duckworth, who is a composer and author and educator. And sadly Ben isn't with us, but for 15 years we were on the forefront of trying to make the web safe for the creative process and really make it open and blur the distinction between professional and amateur, those with technology, those without technology, and really in his coming out of the tradition of Cage saying, what is music? Well, everything is music. Then that's an extension of what is an instrument. Everything can be an instrument, if that's the goal, right? So we felt that it wasn't shutting out, it wasn't necessarily leveling the playing field, because as we worked with amateurs and professionals, we were looking to have a unified dialogue where the amateurs can become more professional, and the professionals would really have a place of collaboration and respect and collegiality, so bringing more people up. Anyway, so as you go ahead and define uncharted instruments and experiences, you have to have some particular considerations on how to design interfaces and those experiences. So as we approach this, we realize that it's most welcoming if you look around at the tools that already exist. So you don't want to set up a situation where, all right, if you want to play with me, you have to have that thing called a keyboard, and you have to make a $1,000 technology investment, and then you have to go and practice and spend all of this time learning, and don't get frustrated because you will get there, right? And eventually in time you can have a place at the table. Or you could go the other way and say, we will develop a safe place for you with the tools that you have, with the things that are available with the technology, make it not frustrating, make it welcoming, make it accessible at your particular talent level. So, like I said, that was back in 1996, and as we in a very small group of instrument developers found, the choices were radically limited. So I'm going to play you just an excerpt of what
Can we pull the audio?
mobile technology sounded like back in the day. Yeah, that was it. That's a piece called Dial Tones by Golan Levin, written in 2001. And that took place in a concert hall where the audience surrendered their mobile phone number. And based on the particular model of phone they had, they set up a dialing program where they knew exactly what tone that phone would produce, and structured it so that there would be space, and they also knew where the people were sitting, so where the spatialization of the sound would be, based on the tones that were produced, what their ringtone assignments were, and so the technology played the audience and played the phones at the time. We did something similar, deciding that we were going to try to do a mobile phone instrument called the pitch web, right? So I talked about considerations, and for us, we wanted to make the interface more shape-sensitive and spatial rather than notated and plain. Right? So at the time, there were 676 different permutations of mobile phone models with different capabilities. If we got lucky, some of them played MP3 files. Well, that was completely radical, right? We had the artist Thomas Dolby, who was developing sounds that were beyond 8-bit and actually had some resonance to them. And so we did this project, and I ended up making 72 different versions of this instrument that ranged from people who could play along with the score and press a shape that was mapped to a keypad, all the way down to, all right, well, your phone can't handle that, so you just press the keypad when you feel like it. Right? And so we ended up having this collective experience. And it took a long time to set up. It was quite frustrating for people, only because they wanted their phone to be able to do that. You know, how come hers can play that song and all I have to do is this? Right? So we sort of muddled through and waited until around 2006 when the iPhone was developed. And that opened up the world of possibilities. Again, there are different platforms. There are different experiences. I still try to write to as many platforms as possible. But within the iPhone, it becomes this ubiquitous, it's more ubiquitous than we had gotten to in the prior 10 years. And a unified experience, and sort of a unified understanding of what you can possibly do with what you've got at hand. So, fast forward to some of the early mobile phone applications at the time, which are still pretty much robust and standard to this day, 10 years later. Okay. So, one of the first companies was Smule, and they were two students out of Stanford, and they developed these applications. And they felt that they wanted to have technology and instruments that were so compelling and so fun that people would get into them before they realized they were actually playing a musical instrument. Right? So their belief was that the instrument should be collective. You should be able to share your contributions, listen to what other people were playing around the world, and easy to use. So one of their first instruments was called the ocarina. An even better instrument. And so the way that you played ocarina was to blow into the phone, blow into the microphone, and play it almost like a pan flute. And here we are. I don't know how much left. Unfortunately, my iPad blew up yesterday, so we're down to limited technology, so I don't know if you can see, but I will tell you where to go on the App Store in case you want to experience this. So you're blowing into the microphone, and then these little dots are the ability to change the tone like the resonator covers. Okay? So this is also global. So you can decide that you're going to send out your contribution and play it better than I do. But so we had an experience, back to the ubiquity of technology and how many instruments did you count, very similar to what Toby played. Bill and I decided to mark the passing of Max Neuhaus, who was an electronics pioneer, and he had an installation in Times Square. And we thought we would go and take our ocarina and play a little homage to Max on top of his installation and play along with his installation. And so I happened to put it on global, and there was somebody playing Amazing Grace, which is a memorial tune. So we sent a text to them saying this is what we're doing, and then all of a sudden 4 or 5 people joined on, and this was a completely spontaneous event. We had a concert and marked the passing of a significant person in the industry. So without that ubiquity, without that accessibility, without that momentary access to it, we wouldn't have been able to have that experience. So Smule has gone forward and decided to pursue, even though this is instrument-based, they felt that while they had the community engagement, they also wanted to make instruments that were instrument-like. So they offer a piano, the Magic Piano, which is free. They offer a guitar, they offer a karaoke, and all of these things are the ability to share, sing along, and play. So I'll play you just a little bit of the Magic Piano. Yeah, video would be nice. So, what we would call an amateur making what sound like professional sounds. This instrument was motivated by the pianist Langland, who masters the flight of the bumblebee. So when they designed it, they wanted to have an instrument that could match his dexterity and ability to reproduce a full sound. So they wrote him and sent him an iPad with the beta version of the application, and they never heard back. And they thought, oh, well, we're pretty pleased with what we did. Maybe he can't embrace that. And in 2010, he surprised everybody and ripped out his iPad and had, in an encore, played Flight of the Bumblebee with his audience online. And they had a 7 magic piano version of Flight of the Bumblebee with a professional and amateurs being able to play along on a level playing field. All right, so instruments that look like instruments. Yeah. Points of entry. We have the cowbell. Right? We have a series of instruments that are gesturally controlled, but pretty limited. You either want to become a cowbell virtuoso or you're bored with it, and it becomes discarded. So, how do you develop an experience that's embracive, maybe not so specific, and you have the people at Generative Music. One of the first significant applications was one that was called Bloom, and it was written in collaboration with Brian Eno. So if you're familiar with Eno's music, it plays for a very long time, and it's got the applications developed a generative algorithm that matched his sonic textures, and they've since developed many more applications within that same soundscape and construct. And so Eno, whose signature piece was Music for Airports, finally, after 30 years, says, now I have an application where I can play my album forever. and it sounds exactly what I wanted it to sound like, and here it is on the phone. And this phone even had, this version, all of their software have a sleep timer, so you can just set it, forget it, and off you go. So with Bloom, it's an algorithm that are remembering your gestures and playing back with you, evolving the process over time. Want to hear this? Oh. And then it comes back to you. So they've got on to, I was talking about non-representational instruments, generative sounds. They wanted to also experiment with shape as a playing mechanism. And so I'll show you just a taste of a new application that they've released. This is called Scape.
Out of sonic building blocks, we call them elements, which then respond intelligently to each other. Here we're making a scape. We've started with a background. Backgrounds play continuously behind the other elements that we've selected. Now we're adding some foreground elements. These foreground elements exist in several categories, distinguished by colour and form. Some are bell-like, percussive, some are melodic, some are textural, some are jittery and mobile, some are pad-like and still. Each element has an independent life story. That's to say, it doesn't behave identically on each performance of the scape. Aside from that, the elements pay attention to each other Behind the scenes are sets of rules which govern the overall behavior of the individual elements. One of the rules says, play 2 notes and wait for 10 seconds. Another one might say, only play when everything else is silent. Another one is, play more sparsely in the evening. In addition to the backgrounds and elements, on the right side of the page, there are buttons that select an overall mood. Activating one of these buttons changes the key and scale of the music, as well as the overall sonic treatment. Think of them as emotional tone controls. Since so many of the elements in Scape are variable, and since they react with each other, a piece plays out differently on each performance. You'll recognize the personality of a given piece, but the performance will not be precisely the same as any other one you've heard. You can save your scapes to a gallery. You can make a playlist to create a seamless transition through a series of them.
So I think what's significant to point out there is if you look at the credits, you have a composer who's been credited. He's provided many times the structure, the intention of the piece. He's got a team of developers behind him that work in collaboration with him to achieve that. And then he's opened it up to the performer, right, to have as rich an experience as they both have. So everyone maintains their roles, and I would just say really becomes a welcoming experience and brings everybody up as a collective experience. So one last thing, and I will pass it on to Andrew. Well, we are going to do a participation thing, and what I thought we might want to do, because of the small number of people, I will tell you, we'll revisit the name of some of these apps. Could I have a small show of hands? How many iPhones do we have? Okay. And then on the other hand, how many people are willing to visit the App Store while we're here? Okay. Okay. And grab some instruments and let's see how we go. Now, the rest of you, same question. Do you have a phone? Do you have a mobile with you? Do you have your keyboard sounds turned on? Can it, would you be willing to do that? Let's explore what we've got at hand and see what we can do. Okay? So, this last one is an instrument called Reactable by Sergi Horta, who is in Barcelona. Now, when we first started developing instruments for the web, so was Sergi, and he developed something called Faust Music Online, which was in collaboration with an opera company. And he took something like 1,100 contributed user sound files and took those sound files, wrote the software, and had the software play back into an opera, which he called Faust 3.0. And I think that was pretty significant because that was 1998. And this is before we were naming, web platforms of 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. So he is such a forward thinker that he was already at 3.0 in 1998. Right? So fast forward to 2006, 7, and he developed the Reactable, which is a musical instrument about this big, using the principles of modular synthesis that was developed by Bob Mogan in 1960. And so it's this table.
It's like about the size of a timpani.
Yeah. And it looks very much like a drum, and it's really abrasive. So it's got a camera that shoots up, and a camera that tracks the motion on the surface. It's opaque glass. And then it's got a projector that also takes that information and sends controlling information back up to the user. And the audio engine is powered by Super Collider and Pure Data, and that responds to all of the filters and things that are associated with modular synthesis. And so then it becomes a very tactile thing because you are picking up these elements, putting them in relationship to the other elements. If they come close to each other, they affect the sound. If they're further away, you can change the pitch, you can change all the parameters, but it becomes really a choreographed motion. So we've got a playing in space. Now in 2010, they put that into the phone as well, and they were able to take gestural controls. So you built this playing surface with all your filters and your sign generator, and now you need looping, and then I need a synthesizer over here, right? And so they've got a gestural control. So if you pop that into the mix, you're now going to dink, dink, dink. I can't play this with you because I've got an old model phone and it's not working very well. But I will tell you a story about being on a panel with a very precocious 2-year-old. Right? And she and I sat, and I was playing Reactable, and she was playing the Magic Piano. And so we're in sound check. And she's got serious technology envy, because she liked my instrument better than hers. Right? And she hadn't had a nap, and she was really starting to get very cranky. And so I said to her, all right, we'll switch. And so the 2-year-old, and very, 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 very stubborn, said, oh, I don't need any lessons. I know exactly what I'm doing. And so the rest of the crew and the audience were on eggshells. And you know the old never perform with a child or a dog? Right? And she took to it like, it was simple as pie. And the output was pretty amazing. We had a really great experience, and the only sad part in the end is she decided she didn't like the audio cable coming out of the phone. So at the very end, in grand gesture, she yanked out her audio, and that was the end of the performance. So, I will end on Reactable, which I think we all would say is slightly closer to an instrument than anything else I've shown you.
When two connected pucks touch each other, they create a hard link. This new red connection remains unbroken regardless of the distance between them or their position. To break an existing hard link, collide the two pucks again. Once a controller is hard linked to another puck, it can be connected to other pucks with the same gesture. This allows you to sequence different generators and filters at the same time. To prevent unintentional changes, you can press the slider dot and drag it towards the outside to lock its value. Drag it again towards the outside to unlock it. Pressing the table surface prior to placing a generator or effect will set its initial volume or value to 0. If the pucks are not aligned with their corresponding projection, you can calibrate the reactable screen. There is a quick calibration mode to adjust the puck's alignment and an advanced calibration mode if the projected images look distorted. You can find them in the setup menu of the reactable application. Follow the instructions on the screen to finish the calibration process.
That was taken on tour by Bjork, and it became a member of her band for a whole year. And when this was released, it became the top-selling instrument for 2 years. Right? So it seemed like people don't need that much convincing to accept that the phone can also be used. So, I will. So some of the ones that I showed you, I tried to look at ones that are free. Reactable, unfortunately, is $10, so I thought that was a little high entry point for just an experiment today. But that's available in the App Store under Reactable. I would look under Smule, S-M-U-L-E, and they've got guitars, the Magic Piano, and they're all free. And then, if we, you can certainly get cowbell if you'd like. Yes, there's kalimba, and what am I missing? Let's see. There's one that is quite beautiful called I Koto, and that's an actual koto. You can get a guitar. I would suggest that while we're listening to Andrew, visit the App Store and see what kind of inspiration we have. So we've got maybe about half the people who will have instruments. We've got an instrument to play along with, and then we've got others just making guitars. Thanks.
Okay, so as Toby suggested, I want to extend this conversation from computers simply being instruments to computers being musical partners. Now, it's not, of course, to deny that someone's guitar is their musical partner, but I think I mean in a more active role than typically a cowbell or a guitar might be a partner. So I wanted to sort of, in a sense, introduce a sort of taxonomy of the musical devices, musical tools, which I think illustrates some of the differences here. So we've got a bunch of tools or instruments which have automatic capabilities, and that's one of the first things which characterises many of the instruments that Toby and Nora have talked about. The fact that they can do things autonomously or automatically, kind of by themselves, in a sense, rather than just sitting inert until they're enacted by a human performer. Of course, there's a long history of automated musical tools, and I've got an example on this slide of a player piano, and there have been others that can just make music automatically as they go. In addition to that, there's tools which I would call responsive, and many of the ones that Nora has shown, and I've got a picture of the Bloom application which she talked about and demonstrated, are these kind of responsive tools. And so they do things when you prod them and poke them and interact with them. And in a sense, many of the acoustic musical instruments can be seen as responsive in this kind of way. But typically when there's generative processes involved, like most of the things that Nora was describing, the kind of responsiveness of the system is not just a simple one-to-one mapping of, do something and a single thing happens, but you do something and a bunch of things happen. Yeah, so this kind of notion of responsiveness. And then a third and final category is interactive tools, and we want to differentiate them between things which are simply responsive to things which are interactive. And when we're talking about interactive tools, there's like a two-way street around interaction. Responsiveness is more of a one-way street. The human is doing most of the input, and the system is somehow responding to that in some preset way. In an interactive tool, the computing system is taking a lot more responsibility for what it's doing. and heading in a way which I think moves towards this notion of the computer or the system or the computing system being a musical partner. It's making more and more of these musical decisions for itself, in inverted commas, depending on the programming that it has. And this is kind of a direction of work that Toby and I have been doing some research on in recent times. And there's a whole bunch of other people around the world who are working on these kind of interactive tools. There are academic conferences on this topic. In particular, there's one that we attended earlier this year called Musical Meta-Creation, which looks at this notion of computing systems which are themselves considered potentially to be creative or even meta-creative, so things that create, systems that create other bits of music. Another conference which is in the academic community which is relevant to this is a Computational Creativity Conference, which looks at how computers can imitate or possess attributes which might be seen to be creative, and that's not just in the musical sphere but in visual art and poetry and other areas. So this is an active area of research and activity. You can also see these kinds of interactive tools turning up in your everyday interactions with systems like Google's products. Google have a system out, a feature out in one of their things called Google Now. Some of you may have it activated on your Android devices if you've got them. Google Now is a kind of does some preemptive things. So it looks at your email streams and various other things, and it says, well, it looks like given all your calendar and your email, you've got an appointment in half an hour's time over here, and I know where you are from your GPS, and I know that you normally travel by bus around the city, and I'm telling you that if you don't leave now, you're not going to get the next bus, which is in 5 minutes' time, to get you to your appointment in half an hour. These are the kinds of things that this Google Now process does, and this is kind of what we mean by a sort of smart or intelligent, interactive kind of technology that works with you in order to meet your objectives and your agenda. And so our scope is much more limited than Google's. We don't have the budget, but nevertheless, we're just interested in these kinds of behaviours within a kind of a musical performance context and a musical improvisation context. So we've developed this system called SIM, which stands for Controlling Interactive Music. This is just the interface of the software. And what I'll do is I'll just do a short demo of this SIM system playing, and then talk a little bit more about it. Just make one change, which will make it easier for you to hear what's going on. So the change I made, just so you understand sonically what's going on, I've just changed the sound of the things that SIM is playing to an electric piano sound, and the things that I'm playing are closer to an acoustic piano sound. So you'll hear those two different timbres, and that's how you'll distinguish what I'm playing from what SIM's playing. As well, sometimes I won't be playing and there's still sound. That's another hint. And in the hand of a decent pianist, probably would sound even better, right? One of the things that we're looking at here is how we can sort of extend musical practices, and we'll get to that in a second, but just a little bit of unpacking of what is actually going on with this software. Firstly, the software has this notion of autonomy, that is, it can kind of do things if and when it likes. It's coupled to what I'm doing, but it's not deterministic. If I do the same thing, it doesn't mean it's going to do the same thing. So it is in this. That means that really these kind of performances at the moment are heavily improvisational because I don't know exactly what's going to come, and so I need to be responding to what that is going as the performer. But there's this notion of autonomy and variety. The other thing is that it's listening to everything I play. Listening in talking marks. So it's capturing everything I'm playing, storing it, remembering it, and it's using that material, the material that I play, as the basis for what it plays. As well, it's doing some real-time analysis of everything that I've played. So it's looking for things like pitch classes, keys and so forth that I'm playing, gestures. It's segmenting things into motives and small sort of chunks that it can then utilise as it goes along. It's looking at the dynamics and the density of the texture and so forth that I'm playing, and using all of this kind of data in order to inform what its behaviour is going to be, what it's going to play. And the interface that you saw before, which just looked like a whole bunch of squiggly, things, is a way in which you can modify that behaviour before the performance or even during the performance, if you wish, so that you can change its behaviour to suit the kind of style of music that you want to play. And the last dot point here is this notion of reflexivity, by which we mean that it looks at what I play, tries to extract from it and use that as the basis for what it's playing. So it's kind of like a distorted mirror is a sort of a metaphor for this. So things that I play are reflected back at me through its kind of processes, and they're not necessarily perfect processes. Although, interestingly, if I set the conditions right on the interface, I can get it pretty much just to simply play back exactly what I play without any transformation or variation. But that's not very interesting. It's just like a delay pedal, So it's much more interesting to let it sort of do a whole bunch of transformations to the things that I play. The reason that we've taken that approach is because it allows us to be reasonably general about the style of music which is performed, because what I play is reflected back at me, and so if I choose to, it almost doesn't matter what style of music I choose to play, in a sense. I'm just going to get that back at me. So it's not like the system itself has a particular genre built into it or anything like that. There are some limitations with that process, particularly around pitch tracking and rhythm tracking and so forth, but these are all research questions for us to be working on. So this raises the question, we go back to Toby's talk at the beginning, is this system, this computing system, a smart instrument, or is it a musical partner, or is it kind of somewhere in between? And one of the things I think it differentiates different systems across this spectra is the degree of kind of control or that you have as a musician, and or the kind of autonomy that it has as a device. And so I've kind of got this, on one side there's instruments like violins, acoustic instruments like that, where you have a lot of control over what you're doing. They are not very autonomous. They don't do a lot if you don't put input into them. On the other side of that spectrum, I've got things like, MP3 players and CD players and things where your control is relatively limited. You can just press play and skip to the next track and do things like that. And its autonomy, if you like, is quite a lot. You can play a lot of music without sort of necessarily having to do very much. And the areas that we're all interested in are in between these kinds of extremes. And I've got a picture here of the iPad ensemble, which we have here at Griffith University, which Toby and I and Matt are in. And so this is a kind of performance situation where we're using iPads with applications similar to the ones that Nora has been describing to you in an ensemble sense. And so it's about making music using these kinds of devices as instruments which fall within this kind of control paradigm between absolute control like you would have on a typical acoustic instrument and kind of almost no control or very little control as you'd have on a CD player. And somewhere in the middle there's a whole bunch of interesting landscape of performance opportunities. And that sort of brings me really to, I think, what is the main point for me, is that these kind of new musical tools open up new musical potentials. There's new musical opportunities. This seems to me simply to be an extension of our normal condition as a species in terms of taking whatever technologies are at hand and turning them to our musical purposes. We invented metals and we invented brass instruments. So when we have computing, we can use that to extend our musical capacities as well. And I think this is the kind of challenge and exploration that people who are working in the spaces we all are grappling with. How do we do that? How do we best do that? What are the affordances of these technologies, and how do we best use them, or not even best, how do we just interestingly use them in order to extend our musical capacities, both as individuals but also as a culture? And where is this going to head, and what are the horizons of new musical possibilities that these things open up? And it seems, to us at least, that these are the sorts of questions that an institution like a music department in a university should be engaged in, trying to think about where these things are going and explore these kind of boundaries and potentials. And like all exploration, some of it's going to sound like crap and not work, and occasionally pieces of it will be brilliant and hopefully get taken up and move on. And I think, interestingly, you can see even in the stuff that Nora talks about with the Shmuel applications, so those things came out of Gawain's and Perry Cook's work at Princeton and Stanford and so forth. So the academic communities have been on the forefront of these advances, and I think that's exactly where we should be. So that's enough from me. I think we should hand it over to you. So hopefully you've all got your apps ready, and I'll pass back to Nora to choreograph the next step of participation.
Wait, but this is a collective composition. And where's your app? Okay, get your phone. How many people do we have at the ready? Okay. So let's just be a little informal. Do you want to start just giving us some sounds and let us know what our parameters are? Yeah, why don't we can probably use the mics too.
Yeah.
Take the boards off.
Well done, folks.
I hope that's copyrighted.
All it's worth.
I certainly have one question that I'm in community music to a certain extent, and I wonder the advent of a musical instrument that people have access to. Many types of, if you want to be in an orchestra, you need to have a valuable instrument, and so it cuts down participation. Probably only choirs and primarily using the voice, that people can be part of a larger group without having investment in a substantial size and instruments. Do you foresee anything useful in that kind of area of community music coming from the use of iPads and phones and you know?
Well, that's basically what has been our focus for the past 15 years, is to reach a point. The frustrating from the side of the developer is you want the best experience for people at the lowest point of cost, right? So we don't design the tools, we can't control them. We try to design the experiences. So when I was saying, all right, so you don't have an iPad or an iPhone, what can you bring to the table? As long as we collectively agree we're going to play, we're calling our technology instruments, and then we collectively agree what sound would be appropriate to make in that context. And yes, so we've done a lot with trying to engage people on that level, and also getting rid of the fear, because it is quite intimidating. Almost, you say you can only bring your voice. Well, yes, you can, but you have to hope that you can sing on pitch, or we have a slight problem, you know. So there's a social situation here, and there's a dynamic, you know. Yes, we've been really trying to work very hard to relax people and say you can't make a mistake, because that's the other thing about technology. As long as you're in relatively the right pitch center and you're tasteful with the sounds that you make, it all is a positive experience.
I think another development in this is in parallel to the things which are done with the kind of electronic tech, the high-end stuff that we've got here, laptops and iPhones and things, is just music being made with like toys. They can be little mechanical toys, or even some of those little crazy electronic toys that just do some things. There's a big movement around what's called circuit bending, which is kind of grabbing very cheap things, little electronic toys, and then messing with the electronics and doing crazy sounds with them. But that's kind of one element of it. But even just this notion of just making music with whatever technology you bring along, I think is really in the spirit of what we're doing. And I guess there's things like software being able to enhance something like a smartphone. The idea is that the smartphones are reasonably ubiquitous, so possibly we're not suggesting that you then go and spend like $800 on a smartphone just to run a free app. That sort of doesn't make much sense. But the point is, if you already have that, then this is a way of using the resources that people already have If they don't have those resources, then I guess in the spirit of what we're talking about, is think about what else can they get access to that makes a noise, right? And then bring it into an environment where, as Nora says, there's no wrong noise to make, there's no judgment about that. And then how do we collectively come together to organise those sounds in an expressive way, just to participate in that kind of communal sonic expression, you know, which is kind of what we, I guess, feel is at the basis of music making. Right. I think another thing for me, following on from that discussion, is we were looking earlier in Toby's presentation and that we were looking at people who are novices and also experts. And so one of the things which we're looking at doing with the SIM project around, you know, having things like interaction with traditional instruments, interfaces anyway, like a keyboard, is that you can also say, if you are an experienced musician who has invested 10,000 hours, right, in learning to play the piano or learning to play some other instrumental technique, that you can also augment that technique. We don't want to only think that this is just for toys and people with no experience, but that it can encompass that wide range from people with no experience through to people with decades of experience who can find a new lease of life and an extension of the work that they're doing at that professional level as well. So we're trying to see how this same idea can spread all the way across the spectrum of people's experience and expertise.
It's a challenge. So, but within that kind of collective, and I hesitate to say it's an improvisation because it's not. The collective experience is an uncontrolled outcome, but the tools are controlled. So it depends on which door you enter into the experience. If I were, say, a composer, I would then suggest, let me structure this, right? Let me create a score, a set of directives, a set of conditions. If, like Andrew, I'm a software developer, and say, this level playing field, it just flattens out. It's like a throwaway experience. It's like the cowbell, one hit, you're done, you figured it out. Because the human brain, once it figures out the pattern, it's moved on to the next thing. So Andrew identifies with the need to support the professional and the amateur so that they're in the same space but having a completely separate experience.
I think that it can, but it's not the only thing that can, but it's one of the things that can. It's interesting, I think, that we constantly get references to things like singing and voice, which everybody in one sense has as a democratic kind of starting point, you know, but that doesn't mean that everybody's equally good as singer, right? But so technologies can do that because they have this potential to be somewhat autonomous. That is, they can take some of the responsibility for the music making. And this is the thing which is fundamental about access. So you can do a very simple gesture, and that gesture can be amplified in the symbolic sense by the technology into something which sounds interesting and satisfying. This has always been a challenge for acoustic music, instrumental learning, that at the beginning, you start on your violin and it cannot necessarily... it's complaining. When you start on your violin, it can often not necessarily sound, really brilliant. Okay, and so fortunately, you've got this cultural kind of encompassing sort of context, which will help you through that phase of doing things. And then we've had all sorts of pedagogical approaches, which also help us to steer people through that process. So in one sense, I think these kinds of technologies which use generative processes are another tool for helping us move people move people through their engagement with music to a deeper and deeper kind of level of engagement as they go. It's a scaffold, if you like. Well, I think then we're done. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you around the forum.